bonsoir Jean-Luc, bonsoir.
Bonsoir Ruth, bonsoir à tous.
Donc PNQ, aujourd'hui, il y a accès aux réformes électorales pour dernière séance parlementaire. Xavier-Luc Duval adresse ce question à Premier ministre Pravin Jagnat. Xavier-Luc Duval pédémon Pravin Jagnat amende Representation of the People Act, d'abord pour qu'il soit capable d'enregistrer un électeur continuellement, mais aussi pour qu'il y ait des comptes de bonne voix, donc jour élection, pour qu'il soit capable de finir faire comptage même jour, mais aussi utilise un tampon en craie électoral pour éviter qu'il y ait un électeur pas vote plus qu'une fois, et que Jean-Luc Xavier-Luc Duval pédémon aussi qui met en place un select committee.
Oui, un PNQ éminemment politique, nous sommes capables de dire Ruth pour clore sa session parlementaire là avant les vacances. L'opposition peut venir avec sa PNQ là parce qu'il finit là la réponse du commissaire électoral et avec une proposition, même pas de position parlementaire ces dernières semaines. Le commissaire électoral finit de cela ville au plaisir d'un point qui finit évoquer donc pas une partie de l'opposition, notamment la question de dépouillement le même jour du scrutin. Nous connaissons très bien qui sa proposition là finit faire par plusieurs parties de l'opposition et le commissaire électoral dit qu'il finit là une réflexion depuis longtemps il peut demander ça et nous connaît très bien qui dans le cas de Rodrigue par exemple dernière élection régionale fin fait dans ces conditions juste après le scrutin fin procède à dépouillement. À Maurice nous fin gagner également dans le cas élection villageoise qui fin faire et après élection fin à dépouillement. Donc à qui point dans l'organisation élection générale capable de faire le commissaire électoral pas dire non, il dit qu'il fin propose ça donc depuis plusieurs fois. Alors nous rappelle donc et que ça peut-être Ruth nous comprend mieux l'état d'esprit du gouvernement et qui je peux envisager par rapport à une éventuelle réforme électorale. Nous rappelle la dernière fois qui le gouvernement de Pravin Jagnat qui une cause de réforme électorale, c'était en 2018. Ouais. 2018, c'est une série de projets de loi série de projets de réforme dans un seul projet de loi qui est présenté au Parlement, mais malheureusement qui pas gain l'adhésion de l'opposition. L'opposition, tu peux dire, c'est pas seulement un projet de loi là, fait arriver un projet de loi distinct et je suis capable d'envisager vote l'aspect important, notamment la représentation féminine qui tient là-dedans. Donc, aujourd'hui, qui le gouvernement envisageait, quand il situe la question de la réforme, ça PNQ là pour que nous trouve un peu plus clair dans les propositions et dans l'agenda du gouvernement. C'est vrai qu'il y a beaucoup de propositions qui PTR, même avec PMSD, finit faire récemment, notamment permettre à un électeur de vérifier à tout moment le registre électoral. Nous connaissons très bien, Ruth, toute la polémique qui s'est levée pour la dernière élection générale, que beaucoup de monde qui trouve le registre et qui pas capable de voter. Et après ça, il y a une campagne pour les gens du monde, assurer eux qui sont là quand la commission électorale passait que eux qui sont capables d'assurer qu'ils sont non là, la liste pour qu'ils soient capables de voter. Et dans sa PNQ là, il y a l'opposition peut dire qu'il permet à du monde, donc une fois qu'il réussit sortir, enregistrement fin complété, mais qui permet de continuer capable donc à tout moment mettre non la liste. Mais à sa proposition qu'il fait dans la proposition de l'opposition, le commissaire électoral dit qu'il électeur à tout moment capable de vérifier. Donc pour lui, ça va poser un problème, ça, il est capable de vérifier à tout moment si je non le registre. Mais quand donc le sujet devient plus difficile parce est-ce qu'ils sont capables à la veille à l'élection par exemple vérifier et à ce de tous pénal non. Donc là nous proposons également une précision. Fini là aussi donc la proposition qui l'opposition fin mettre en avant ne plus permettre computer room peut-être sa question là pour glisser dans donc les points qu'il pourra aborder dans la PNQ. La question du computer room, le commissaire électoral finit dire qu'il n'a aucune incidence sur sa question de computer room là, le processus du décompte de vote et ça finit confirmé selon le commissaire électoral par la Cour suprême quand il y a donc tout ça une pétition électorale là. Voilà donc qui est à l'esprit, donc ici à Constance, sa private discussion là pour présenter, alors qu'il y a un parlementaire pour aller donc en vacances, un dernier PNQ qui risquait de mettre les feux aux poules, nous connaissons une cause là politique, une cause là de l'attente d'un jugement du Privy Council dans donc l'affaire Pravin Jagnat, une cause aussi un PNQ qui peut venir à un moment que tout le monde peut dire élection de la porte, élection de l'opposition peut faire sur l'alliance, donc tout ça contexte-là fait qui c'est PNQ, donc qui est extrêmement intéressant pour nous suivre.
Nous rappelle aussi que quand le gouvernement a fait cette proposition en 2018, l'opposition déplore le fait qu'il n'y ait pas fini une consultation au préalable. Donc, le gouvernement a fini parce qu'il y tient un mandat et que nous tient à la veille des élections générales de 2019. Donc, dans ce programme électoral en 2014, il dit qu'il peut venir de l'avant avec une réforme électorale. Il est venu en 2018, il proposé, et même Pravin Jagnet nous rappelle Jean-Luc Chameni au Parlement.
Tout à fait.
Mais ça m'a dit
après, il retient parce qu'il ne connaît pas pour gagner les 3 corps pour capable passer ça projet de loi. Et la campagne du MSM à cette époque-là finit qui nous fait amener une réforme, une refuse votée. Ouais. Alors que l'opposition dit qu'il nous amène une réforme qui est un consensus, qui tout bonne partie de l'opposition et que le gouvernement tombe d'accord sur ce point-là. Alors que c'est vrai qu'il va la consultation, pas qu'il y a beaucoup consultation dans sa proposition qui tu fais là. Et bon, là, nous pouvons comprendre ce que le gouvernement envisage venir avec une autre réforme, un autre document. Et nous rappelle que les partis politiques soumettent une proposition. Donc, la consultation, pas de faire en termes un tour de table pour faire du monde causer. Non, c'était des bandes partis envoient des propositions pour être considérées, mais bandes partis déploraient ce qu'ils ont envoyé.
Oui, parce que déjà, le gouvernement, tu viens avec ces propositions. Tu finis de dire qu'il peut remplacer best loser système pour un best loser seat. Donc, tu peux avoir 12 sièges additionnels. Donc, tu peux empêcher qu'un candidat décline de appartenance ethnique, entre autres. Tu peux assurer une meilleure présence féminine à l'Assemblée nationale. Donc, c'est quelques mesures qui t'y proposent. Sauf qu'avant les vignes avec cette proposition, il n'y a même pas ouvert les discussions avec l'opposition. Donc, c'est là que l'opposition qui t'y déplorait. Mais là, il est intéressant pour connaître si le Premier ministre pour évoquer ça aujourd'hui.
Il ne faut pas oublier aussi qu'il y a l'engagement que le Premier ministre prend devant la Commission des droits des Nations Unies face à recours qui est résistance alternative tu faire. Mais donc, Pravin Jagnet, à l'époque, tu peux souligner qu'il y a une réalité de Maurice, que tout le monde leaders des candidats aux élections en fonction de l'appartenance ethnique. Donc, il n'est pas tiré ici avec une autre formule comment pour permettre tout cela. Est-ce qu'il nous a l'occasion de gagner un détail là, nous pouvons capable comprendre mieux qu'il est à l'esprit des autorités, nous pouvons écouter dans quelques instants. Donc, l'Assemblée nationale, déjà, les travaux déjà commencé avec l'Assemblée nationale, nous pouvons écouter justement cette PNQ du leader de l'opposition adressée au Premier ministre dans quelques petites secondes maintenant.
Announcements none. Papers have been laid. Question.
Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is addressed to the Honourable Prime Minister. Whether, in regard to the reform for the registration of electors and electoral processes, he will state if consideration will be given A. To amend the Representation of the People Act for continuous registration of electors, for counting of votes to be effected on the polling day, and for use of indelible ink to prevent multiple voting, or, in the alternative, for the appointment of a select committee consisting of members of the Assembly under Standing Order 70 to report on the above within a short time frame.
Mr. Speaker, sir, as the House is aware, the reform of our electoral system has been appearing prominently in the electoral manifestos of the main political parties and party alliances, and also in the government programs of successive governments for the last 20 years or so. As a matter of fact, since the year 2001, several reports on electoral reform by experts and knowledgeable persons have been commissioned and published, including the report of the Commission on Constitutional Reform and Electoral Reform, commonly known as the Sachs Report, released in 2002, the Kolenda-Velu Report on Proportional Representation in February 2004, the Liangxing Report on Funding of Political Parties in 2004, the Carcassonne Report in December 2011, the Sitanen Report in January 2012, the consultation paper on modernizing the electoral system in March 2014, and the electoral reform proposals of the Mauritius Labour Party and the Mouvement Militant Mauricien, released in September 2014. Mr. Speaker, sir, the House will also recall that, apart from certain recommendations of the Sachs report, none of the recommendations contained in the other reports were implemented. In fact, no serious attempts were made by successive governments for the implementation of those recommendations. They all only paid lip service to electoral reform, and all those reports were conveniently relegated on the back burner, with the result that the promised electoral reform remained a dead letter due to political differences, hidden agendas, lack of political wisdom and willpower, as well as the disproportionate ambition of some leaders. It is only when the new government came into power in 2014 that electoral reform received the attention and seriousness that it really deserved. To recall, soon after acceding to power, the new government pledged to reform our electoral system and announced reform measures in its 2015-2019 program, which included, inter alia, the introduction of a dose of proportional representation in our electoral system, and especially measures to guarantee better women representation in the National Assembly. Accordingly, a ministerial committee under the chair of Honorable Xavier Duval, then Deputy Prime Minister, was set up in January 2016 to examine the different aspects of our electoral system and make recommendations for its reform. Following the departure of Honorable Xavier Duval from the government, the ministerial committee was reconstituted in February 2017 under the chair of late Sir Anirudh Jagannath, then Minister Mentor, to pursue and complete the unfinished assignment left by the outgoing chairperson. Following the recommendations made by the Ministerial Committee, the Constitution Amendment Bill and the Political Financing Bill were introduced into the National Assembly in May 2018 and June 2019, respectively. However, both bills were not supported by the then opposition, and they therefore failed to secure the required majority to be passed by the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is a matter of deep regret that these two bills, embodying profound, unprecedented, and long overdue electoral reform initiatives, had not been supported by the then opposition. They chose to be on the wrong side of history. Had those bills been voted, they would have marked a huge step ahead in the consolidation of our democracy, and they would also have corrected the gross underrepresentation of women in our National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, sir, in regard to Part A1 of the private notice question, as the House is aware, the registration of electors in Mauritius is governed by the provisions of Section 44 of the Constitution and Section 9 of the Representation of the People Act, which also provides the detailed procedure by which the electors list is compiled. The compilation of the electoral register is indeed a crucial exercise, as the register constitutes a vital element in ensuring the integrity of our voting system. Mr. Speaker, sir, given that the law provides that no person has the right to vote unless his name appears in the register of electors, the Office of the Electoral Commissioner carries out, under the supervision of the Electoral Supervisory Commission, a registration exercise every year for the compilation of a register of electors for each constituency. The register comes into force on 16th of August of that year and remains in force until the next register compiled comes into force. That is, the register remains in force until the 15th of August of the following year, pursuant to Section 4, 1 and 3 of the Representation of the People Act. Section 4.2 of the RPA further provides that a person who has not yet attained the age of 18 in a year, but who would be 18 by the 15th of August in that year, would also be registered and therefore eligible to vote. However, the name of a person who has attained the age of 18 after the 15th of August in that year will only be entered in the register of electors, which would be compiled following the next registration exercise, that is, the following year. Consequently, in the event an election is held after the 15th of August in a year and before the 16th of August of the following year, that is, before the coming into force of the next electoral register, such a person would not be able to vote, although he would have attained the age of 18 and is resident and domiciled in Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, sir, we all know, and it is a fact, that the Office of the Electoral Commissioner deploys considerable resources to ensure that the largest number of eligible electors is captured during the exercise. I'm not going to elaborate here on all the actions taken by the Office of the Electoral Commissioner to create awareness and sensitize eligible electors to register themselves during the yearly registration exercise. Suffice it for me to say that the last canvass exercise conducted in 2022 for the registration of electors in Mauritius captured 97.3% of the total number of persons who were eligible to be registered as electors. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am informed that there is no established benchmark on the completeness of electoral registers. The range of completeness around the world varies a lot. For example, for Great Britain, in 2018, it was 85%. The ideal situation, of course, would be to capture all eligible electors, but this is unlikely to be the case in any country. I am also informed by the Office of the Electoral Commissioner that every registration exercise is carried out in two phases. Firstly, the house-to-house inquiry at the beginning of the year, and secondly, a registration exercise is in registration centers in the month of May. Despite all the efforts put in by the Office of the Electoral Commissioner, it is practically impossible to reach all qualified persons to have their names included in the register of electors. Consequently, some electors in the different constituencies may find that their names do not appear in the register of electors. I would like to mention here that it is also the civic duty of all eligible persons to get themselves registered to be able to exercise their right to vote. Mr. Speaker, sir, the House will recall that for the 2019 National Assembly elections, the opposition raised a great hue and cry over this issue, even going to the extent of casting aspersions on the integrity and reputation of the Electoral Supervisory Commission and the Electoral Commissioner, whose competence and professionalism in electoral matters have always been recognized both locally and internationally. The opposition instigated controversy and protests in the country alleging that some people had been deliberately disenfranchised and deprived of their voting rights because of their political affiliation. The issue was even mentioned as a ground for invalidating the elections in the election petitions filed before the Supreme Court. However, except for 2, which are still pending, all the petitions have either been set aside by the Supreme Court or withdrawn by the petitioners themselves. Mr. Speaker, sir, be that as it may, we on this side of the House, we certainly do not want any of our eligible citizens to be deprived of his fundamental constitutional right to vote at an election. It is a fact that our registration process, which was largely inspired from the UK model, has remained unchanged since its introduction in 1958, and some provisions of the Representation of the People Act 1958 may need to be revisited. Besides, some inherent challenges in the current registration process in Mauritius were highlighted by the Sachs Commission in its 2002 report on electoral reform. Mr. Speaker, sir, I am informed that the way the registers of electors are compiled varies enormously worldwide. Many jurisdictions pick and choose best practices from elsewhere when they need to improve their system. However, as far as we are concerned, we cannot blindly replicate another country's system. A system that has been successfully adopted in one country does not mean that it will necessarily work well in another country. In such matters, there is really no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. A critical element which has to be taken into consideration is the local context, and we certainly need to move with care and caution on such fundamental aspects of our electoral process. In this context, the advisability of introducing online registration, a continuous registration process, and a maximum use of available technology will be examined. However, we are also alive to the fact that these proposals would require major organizational and technological changes. In view thereof, and having regard to the wide-ranging implications, government will, as usual, adopt a consultative, participatory, and holistic approach before proposing any amendment to any specific provisions of the Representation of the People Act. Mr. Speaker, sir, in regard to Part A2 of the question, that is counting of votes on the polling day itself after close of poll for National Assembly elections, first of all, I would like to point out that this proposal never appeared in any political manifesto or any government program, although the Sachs Commission had proposed same-day counting way back in 2002. And it should be mentioned that on this issue as well, the opposition, en mauvais perdant, tried to instill doubts in the minds of the people about supposed manipulation and rigging in the 2019 general election. In spite of the favorable comments and observations made by all the regional and international elections observer missions. But we all know that there was absolutely no evidence to substantiate these accusations. Having said this, I do agree that same-day counting would indeed eliminate many hassles for all concerned, the main one being the elimination of all the logistics comprising security measures, transport arrangements, and deployment of a large number of police officers associated with the transfer of the ballot boxes from polling stations to counting centres after close of poll. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me remind the House that it is this government that brought necessary amendments to the law to enable the implementation for the first time of same-day counting for the village council elections held in November 2020 and the Rodrigues Regional Assembly elections held in February 2022. However, I am advised that there are a number of issues which will have to be addressed while considering same-day counting for National Assembly elections. Careful thought would have to be given to the required logistics with regard to National Assembly elections, taking into account the large number of voting and counting rooms, which I am informed will be around 2,400 for the next National Assembly elections, compared to 1,365 for the Village Council elections 2020 and 89 for the 2022 Rodrigues Regional Assembly elections. Other very important issues which will also have to be addressed include the following: which category of election staff will be authorized to decide on the ballot papers to be rejected, presence of candidates and election agents in all counting rooms during the scrutiny of ballot papers, whether hours of poll will have to be revisited, and how to ensure transparency in the compilation of results. Mr. Speaker, sir, in regard to Part A3 of the question, I am advised that as the law stands presently, electors are required to present a proof of identity before being issued with a ballot paper. Moreover, it should also be pointed out that polling agents of political parties are present in the voting rooms at all times during the voting process. There are therefore already adequate safeguards to prevent impersonation and multiple voting. Besides, I am informed that since the introduction of proof of identity, the number of cases of impersonation and double voting has reduced considerably and is almost negligible. For example, for the 2019 general election, there was not a single case of impersonation. On the other hand, the use of indelible ink may give rise to constitutional issues and can also be challenging due to cultural, religious, and health concerns. The proposal would therefore have to be examined carefully. Mr. Speaker, sir, in regard to Part B of the question, as the House is aware, this government remains committed to bring the long-awaited electoral reform as initiated in the government program 2020-2024. In this context, a ministerial committee has already been set up under my chair to make recommendations on electoral reform and on the financing of political parties. The committee has already embarked on its assignment and is currently working on a new political financing bill, which is one of the main aspects of the electoral reform agenda of the government. The proposals for continuous registration of electors and same-day counting and use of indelible ink will be examined by the Ministerial Committee in that same context. Therefore, the need to set up a parliamentary select committee does not arise. Mr. Speaker, sir, government will, in due course and after necessary consultation with all relevant stakeholders, come forward with new bills on political financing and electoral reform. We can only hope that the opposition will, this time, walk the talk and support the electoral reform proposals which are long overdue. Because in the end, it is not the talk, but the work that really matters for the country and for the people. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the question is that if the government is serious about this bill being implemented and being passed in the House, although it doesn't require constitutional amendments, it does require consensus across the parties. And this is made quite clear by Electoral Commissioner himself. This is the reason why we are asking for a select committee of all the parties in Parliament, so that if we are serious with going forward with this quickly, we can do so. What is the objection of having a select committee of the House?
Mr. Speaker, sir, I have mentioned in my reply, there have been so many reports that have looked carefully at many aspects with regard to electoral reform. And also, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition would recall, when he was part of my government, in 2016, I believe, yes, in our government then, you were chairing a committee. It was a ministerial committee to look at different aspects of electoral reform. I believe if you are now saying that we should have a select committee, probably then you should have said at that time that we need a select committee instead of a ministerial committee. So the fact that you yourself chaired the ministerial committee already answers your question that if we want the process to move fast, and in the light of so many reports that have already been made to all of us. Now, I think all of us, as stated before, I believe all of us have become experts in electoral reform. There is no need to have a select committee again and to go on and on and on this issue. I can say, this is our fulfillment this is our undertaking, that what we have mentioned in our program, we are already working on electoral reform, on financing of political parties, and as I said, we will look at all those issues, not only those that you have mentioned, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. There are other issues that concerns electoral processes, election, that will be looked into. There is going to be wide consultation also with, of course, all parties, not only in Parliament, but extra outside Parliament. And obviously, then we will come eventually with any recommendation. And if, of course, there is the necessity to come, which I believe, because I am speaking in my own name now, because I need to have consultation at the level of government, we will come with different, whatever amendments we believe is necessary.
Nearly time over. I hope you will give us some additional time. Now, the Prime Minister is mixing, or we should not mix at least, electoral reform and electoral processes, reform of electoral processes. My question is purely on reform of electoral processes, and I'd like to ask the Prime Minister whether he will not want to avoid the mistake made when he tried to pass legislation some time ago, where it was an omnibus bill, where some of the items were found by the opposition to be objectionable and even dangerous. This is why, in respect for democracy and the right of every political party to have a say, we are saying that it is not the right procedure for you to adopt in a ministerial committee, and it should go, again I'm saying, to a select committee.
No, I do not agree, Mr. Speaker, sir, because electoral processes is part also of electoral reform. You can't look at this subject in a piecemeal manner. you have to look at it in a holistic manner. There are so many aspects of our law that we believe needs to be revisited, needs to be updated. And as I said, the law dates back from Representation of the People Act 1958, I believe. So I have stated in my answer that there are certain things, of course, that we need to review. And I believe that there are certain things we will agree. I believe. So we have to look at all those aspects, not in silos, but all together. And then we will decide on what kind of proposal we are going to make eventually to the National Assembly. So you can't dissociate the electoral process and the electoral reform. It is one of the same thing, although there are certain things that will not require a qualified majority. There are certain things that can be amended. There are certain things that can be amended by way of regulation also. So we will obviously address all these in what manner, in what way, in what form, what is the required majority that is needed. And of course, we will come before the House.
Mr. Speaker, I've chosen the three items because all three of them enjoy the strong support of the Electoral Commissioner. In fact, he put it in writing, for the first two at least, he put it in writing, that he has always been in favor of these changes, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to ask the Honourable Prime Minister whether he is aware that the number of electors registered today compared to 2019 has shown an increase of 53,000 people. What it shows is that for 2022 at least, there has been a real effort, but it also shows that there were some serious deficiencies in 2019 because in 3 years, 53,000 additional electors have been added to the electoral register. That indicates the urgency of electoral reform of the registration process. 53,000 people additionally.
But the Honourable Leader of the Opposition should qualify what he says when he states that the Electoral Commission has agreed on all the three issues that you mentioned. No, let me say, I'm not saying no, but you should give the full picture. The response, I have it here, that with regard to allow electors to check whether their names are uncurrently. Yeah, but this is part of it. You say registration, but how do you register, you don't check? This is also part of it. How can you, you register and then you don't know whether your name appears on the list of the register? But anyway, I don't want to take time of the House. You know it, all members of the opposition, because it's all in your name that this has been presented. There are certain aspects of the process that the Electoral Commission has said you have to address, because there are some logistics issues. There are, for example, for the counting, the Electoral Commission also mentions that there is need to look at the organization of this counting on the same day. But for counting, Mr. Speaker, sir, l'opposition doit au moins accepter que c'est ce gouvernement qui a implémenté le counting on the same date pour les élections villageoises, le counting on the same date pour le Rodrigues Regional Assembly election. And of course, I have stated, we are going to look, I personally agree that if we can do it, it's going to be easier, it's going to avoid a lot of things that we know that happens on the very next day. But for example, bear in mind, I just think of one issue. You will have counting in all the polling stations of one constituency. No? How do you do that then? If you don't have counting... Yes, he can put in another supplementary question, but if we have counting, it means that all the boxes where the votes have been cast will remain in the same room. How do you do that? Then, well, then we as candidates, we are going to be free candidates. Free candidates in a constituency. You will have, I don't know how many polling stations. Are we able to move from one polling station to the other and to the other to the other to check what is being done? Because in the case of having one center for counting, it allows us as candidates to be able to be present and to monitor and to see to it that, you know, in spite of doing that, in spite of all these precautions, all these security measures, this opposition has been making all sorts of vile allegations. Now, can you imagine when you will have all these different counting centers in one constituency, and when a candidate will not be able to be present everywhere? I'm just putting that as an issue that has to be addressed. I'm not saying that because of that I am against. No, I said personally, I think it has got a lot of benefits, but it has to be addressed so that there is no perception or any doubt in the minds of course, in candidates, political parties, and the population that certain things can be ongoing. So as I say again, in the reply that has been made by the Electoral Commission, there are certain things that have been pointed out that we need to address. Now, the third one, sorry, this is not my information with regard to the indelible ink, because this is not my information that it has been agreed by the Electoral Commission. Not at all. This, anyway, it was not raised in the document that you had communicated to the Electoral Commission, and everything, I've gone through it, of course, and I thank you for giving me an advance copy also. I've gone through it, I've not seen it, I've checked with the Electoral Commission. That is not the situation. They have not accepted. Maybe it's good that we are going to look into it further, but it's not yet accepted by the Commission.
Speaker, in the letter that I sent to the Prime Minister, I did say that the indelible ink was agreed not in the text, but at a subsequent meeting. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister whether he will check the UK model, because I have never suggested that the votes should be counted in situ in the classroom, because that opens a lot of problems about which village, which area voted for which party, etc., creates possible discrimination. I would like to ask the Prime Minister to look at the UK model, where in fact you still have transportation to the counting centre, and the voting is in the counting centre for that particular constituency. So you have a mixture of same-day voting, but in the counting centre and not in each polling. And that is why the difference, and I, for one, am not at all in favour of the counting in situ in each classroom, because obviously then the votes would be much more apparent who voted for what, which community voted for whom, etc., etc. That would not be a good thing.
Yeah. That I'm looking into that also. What are the best practices also elsewhere? And of course, this also will require logistic arrangements, security, and so on, because we are going to move, as we do move in the night, boxes from one polling station to one place. Now, again, this will have to be done, and don't forget that then counting, by the time counting will start, and by the time counting will be over. Now, those officers who have started to work in the early morning will still be there, and how long they are going to work. All this has to be looked into. Again, when I say this, I'm not saying this because I say these are things that cannot be done. They can be, but we have to address all this and let's hope that we can make it.
Prime Minister, when, I mean, is it going to be, are you going to bring the decision next week? I understand the elections are not far away. So, in fact, I saw that the margins of Mr. Speaker, the urgency is this. The urgency is this. Obviously, we hear it might be in a few months. The urgency is this, that many of the number of vote difference between third and fourth candidates have been very low in a number of constituencies, as low as 25. So the registration of voters and the accuracy of the voting and in fact, the fact that we are counting on the same day, all these take another importance here in Mauritius because the differences are often so small. So this is why I'm asking the Prime Minister. I regret very much that he's not agreeable to a select committee, but at least when is he going to bring some changes, not to electoral reform, which is a complicated thing, but to see simple electoral processes that I maintain the Electoral Commissioner is in favor of.
First of all, let me reassure the Honourable Member that general elections will not be next week. No, it cannot anyway. According to law, you will have to give at least the minimum is 1 month's notice. So oh, not the election. I understood the election. And I thought that you were thinking of the Privy Council case. So that, no, not next week. How can we be? I have said that there's a ministerial committee. We are working. Now, I again do not agree with the leader of the opposition that we look at this aspect of registration of electors separately from all the other issues. Then we will look at in terms of counting on the same day, if ever we are able to implement this separately. All this have to be looked at in a way that the committee, because there is a committee that is going to look at this in depth and also have consultations. And of course, we will need to have consultations with the Electoral Commission, with the Electoral Supervisory Commission as well. And then I don't think it's a question of, if you ask me whether it is going to be before next general election, I can say yes, safely yes. Safely yes, because we have time. We will have time. So, but let the committee, let us at least come to a draft, and then we will have consultations. You will be consulted, obviously, and I hope we can then come to a consensus on, well, whether there, I don't know whether if you can come to a consensus on all issues, so much the better, but that will not prevent you from saying, look, we agree on this and this, but we don't agree on the other issues also. Then we will know how to move forward.
Some time ago, the representative, the head of the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, International Institute, came to Mauritius, and he met the opposition as well. And he offered the help and advice of this very influential institution in getting our electoral procedures right. Can I ask the Prime Minister whether he is agreeable to engaging or interchanging with, exchanging with the Institute so that we may get expert advice on how to get all these things done very quickly, because all these paths have been crossed before around the world.
Mr. Speaker, sir, let me inform the House that, in fact, I had met the Secretary General of the International Institute for Democracy and International Assistance on the 25th of May, 2023, in the company of the Regional Director for Africa and West Asia, the head of the Mozambique country office, and the Chief of Staff to the Secretary General. We discussed on the issues of financing of political parties, on the issue of electoral reform. In fact, I had asked them for their advice also. We have already given them, we have communicated a copy of the previous bill that was tabled in the House for both the Political Financing Bill 2019 and the Constitution Amendment Bill 2019. Again, of course, we are open. We will see what are their views on those issues. But I don't know, and I am not passing any judgment on the will of the leader of the opposition. But since now I see that he has a new leader, because you are in an alliance with a new leader. So I don't know whether your new leader has the same, is of the same conviction as you are. Because let me just remind you what he has said with regard to electoral reforms. Évoquant sa rencontre avec Paul Béranger, Alan Ganou, vous le recall, Rachid Bibijan et Ramasitanen, Navin Ramgoolam a affirmé à Boadi qu'il faut que les gens se rendent à l'évidence. Parce qu'il pas écrire couillon l'homme au front. Quel Premier ministre dans le monde qui a remporté 3 élections avec un système électoral voudrait le changer? Quel Premier ministre voudrait introduire un système où sa majorité serait moindre? So, I think this is what he stated. Now, of course, now that he has lost general election, he's in the opposition and making all sorts of allegations. And in fact, I find this really outrageous, Mr. Speaker, sir, that at least he would have had the courage of having entered an election petition himself. I mean, the former Prime Minister, Dr. Navin Ramgoolam. And then, instead of going and substantiating all what he has averred in the petition before a court of law, he chose to run away and to withdraw the petition. This in fact reflects on the sincerity of such a leader that you have now.
Time over.
Donc voilà pour cette PNQ Jean-Luc. Donc nous apprenons qu'il y a un comité ministériel qui fait mettre sur pied. Donc c'est le Premier ministre même qui peut présider sa comité là. L'IP préside sa comité là lors une réforme électorale et aussi lors financement d'un parti politique, donc d'un projet de loi. Donc et pas lieu. Donc les fins dire pas nécessairement, pas bizarre à cause de cela, mettre un select comité sur pied.
Oui, donc le Premier ministre est catégorique, pas pour un select comité comme a l'idée de l'opposition peut réclamer. L'idée qui est un comité ministériel qui peut déjà travailler donc financing political, donc le financement des partis politiques, un projet de loi lequel peut déjà travailler et l'idée aussi qui il pouvait avoir une discussion, pour une bonne consultation et l'opposition pour capable de ce point de vue la question. Alors sa consultation là, l'idée qu'il pouvait et pour un point qu'ils avaient le Duval il disait Pravin Jagnath, il ne fallait pas mélanger réforme électorale et réforme des procédures électorales. Pravin Jagnath n'était pas capable de dissocier les deux. Et quand on a la consultation, l'opposition, vous avez dit, ça l'aspect là, nous pas d'accord, ça l'aspect là, nous d'accord. Donc, il espérait en tout cas qu'il y ait l'unanimité, qui est capable de trouver une solution, qu'il y ait un consensus qui est trouvé pour capable de venir de l'avant avec sa réforme qui est long overdue. Il fait l'historique de tout un rapport qui finit là par le passé, rapport Caucasson, rapport Sachs, un rapport qui c'est le comité avec Colin Davelou, Emmanuel Lunching, ce rapport. Donc, tout ça, un document là qui fait un travail, la réforme électorale, mais l'idée qui personne pas fait une venir de l'avant avec la réforme électorale. L'autre point rapidement qui fait une ressortie aussi, la question du counting, le jour même des élections. Premier ministre dit que c'est ce gouvernement qui fait permettre counting dans le cadre d'élections et élections villageoises de Maurice, comment elle a peut dire. Et il dit que ça nécessite quand même une réadaptation de l'urban procédure. Il dit par exemple pour une élection, vous avez 2400 salles de classe. Et si nous avons une élection villageoise, il y a uniquement 89 la salle qui peut donc mobiliser. Et,
pour Rodrigue 89.
Pour Rodrigue 89, pardon. Et donc, il fait comprendre qu'il peut bien quand même une réadaptation. Et ce à quoi une question supplémentaire, avec le Duval fin dire qui il pas peut dire qui besoin récompte dans la même salle de classe, il peut dire get la formule qui fait ailleurs, il peut toujours cause transport ban bulletin d'un counting centers. Comment cela pour faire pour Pravin Jugnut pour besoin quand même beaucoup de discussions, beaucoup de réflexions pour qu'il amène une procédure qui est acceptable et acceptée, qui est capable donc être appliquée dans le contexte mauricien. La question de langue indélébile, il dit que ça aussi capable de poser un problème constitutionnel, donc il dit qu'il peine à ça en tout cas dans le programme électoral jusqu'ici, et pas fin propose ça réellement dans les propositions qui l'opposition fin faire à la commission électorale, mais il dit ça aussi pour bien look into dans le cadre une réforme électorale complète, mais il dit qu'il jusqu'à l'air, ben cas impersonation pas existé quasiment très rare, et l'idée aussi que ban du monde, ban des dernières élections, pas fin de gagner quasi nul, donc le nombre de personnes qui essayent, comment dire, voter dans place les autres du monde. Voilà, rapidement, qui nous capable de dire
oui, et concernant l'enregistrement des électeurs, oui. Donc l'IPEDIA qui se penche aussi pour introduire le online registration, donc je peux analyser ce processus-là parce qu'il demande beaucoup de changements au niveau technologie, donc l'IPEDIA qui gouvernement pour adopter une approche, pour une consultation avant qu'il amende Representation of People Act.
Voilà, donc le online process peut examiner, probablement il peut capable être introduit, mais tout cela sujet à une discussion et qui peut faire par sa comité ministériel qui est présidé, qui met sur pied pour régler la question de la réforme électorale. Voilà, c'est ici qui nous prend en congé de vous, là, sa question de Xavier Duval aujourd'hui au PNQ, dernier PNQ pour sa session-là, et après sa séance-là, donc le private motion, members motion qui peut continuer, et dans quelques petites secondes, donc vous gagnez l'information qui pourrait venir en détail. C'est un point qui est évoqué dans sa PNQ. Merci, au revoir.